Hello there, my name's Jim Gillies. I'm a certified dog behaviour consultant, and I'm here today to talk to you about the nature of nurture, ethology's role in meeting canine needs. I'd like to extend my thanks and gratitude to the organisers for inviting me along. I'm keen to discuss this topic. So we'll just crack on with the presentation. So I just want to give you a bit more information on myself in terms of my background, qualifications and experience. I'm a fully certified behaviourist via the IAABC. I have over 10 years experience working complex behaviour cases, approximately 4,000 plus behaviour cases in the past. I'm working towards a clinical animal behaviourist certification via the APBC in the UK. I worked with Dogs Trust Rescue for 4 years in their flagship post-adoption support team based out of their central behaviour team in London. I have level 5 and 6 qualifications in animal behaviour and applied animal behaviour, and I provide expert witness services for court cases involving the Dangerous Dog Act in the UK. So how did I get into behaviour? I got into behaviour with my late Labrador, Floyd, who sadly passed a couple of months ago. He had spent nearly 2 years in a kennel. Most of his young years were spent in captivity. He had developed a range of behaviour issues from there. He was massively under socialised and his basic needs hadn't been met for a long time. He had developed some problematic coping strategies along the way, primarily flank sucking, where he would repetitively lick his hind leg until a wound opened up. Latterly, we did manage to resolve that by transferring it onto a blanket, and then later in life, the need for that had diminished, and the behaviour did subside. But his story is a reminder of the importance of socialisation and understanding the impact that inadequate socialisation has, but also the impact of captivity also. So, in terms of Floyd's behaviour, he's a good point of reference for me. Sometimes the more difficult dogs that you live with are the best teachers. And when I worked through becoming a behaviourist, lots of behaviour was through the lens of reinforcement and punishment. You know, behaviour was contingent on one of the two of those, and we viewed the behaviours through that particular lens. As my career evolved and I managed to speak to more and more professionals, one professional who struck me in my career was Kim Brophy, who is an ethologist, and her and I did an amazing talk on ethology and the understanding of ethological impacts on our dog's behaviour. So I thought we would just start by running through the very basics, and you'll all be very aware what ethology is, but we'll just cover that off for thoroughness, and it is the objective study of animal behaviour. I like the definition of it being the study of animal behaviour in their natural setting, which of course is difficult when you work with dogs because they don't necessarily live in their natural setting, which is something we will come on to. And there will be some parallels between talking about dog behaviour in captivity and other animals in captivity also. So there'll be lots of parallels here across species. We look at behaviour as an evolutionary trait. So like physical traits, behaviour evolved primarily for survival and reproductive needs. And certain canine behaviours are adaptations to their historical roles and environments they lived in. Some of those natural canine behaviours that are innate are things like hunting, which we'll know very well, foraging, absolutely, scenting, very much so, and nesting, some of the natural kind of intrinsic behaviours that we would see within those species. And then we have the kind of age-old, argument about between nature and nurture, and we do distinguish between those innate characteristics and then the influence of the environment on dog behaviour. And while certain traits can have a genetic origin, be breed specific, a significant part of a dog's behaviour is shaped by the upbringing, training, socialisation, and experiences or lack thereof. And then we have very much the predatory motor sequence that every dog owner will or should be familiar with in terms of that genetic blueprint for their predatory behaviour. And it's very much about searching, seeking, stalking, chasing, catching, killing, dissecting. And these behaviours are very instinctive for our dogs. We'll maybe all have known that terrier who likes to rip and tear the innards out of soft toys. I have had one just today, actually, a Staffordshire Bull Terrier who dissects toys on a regular basis and seems to thoroughly enjoy that activity. Could be labelled as a behaviour issue and absolutely could be problematic to certain owners, particularly if they then ingest those items. But if it's simply that practicing of a predatory behaviour, then very much that would have a strong genetic component, and we could look at that behaviour rather than the contingencies of the behaviour. We could maybe view that through the lens of their ethological historical backgrounds. So how we dovetail this into the theme of the conference is that how we can maybe use an ethological lens to view canine needs, essentially, and make sure that these animals are well integrated and their needs are met appropriately, or they will meet them inappropriately. It's just simple as that for some of these breeds. Now, the example I'm using here is this lovely short-haired pointer who is very much in stock mode. Objectively, a very impressive behaviour, I find, from hunt, point, and flush dogs, Hungarian Vizslas, short-haired pointers, etc. But ethology offers a window into that evolutionary function of their behaviours that we observe within our domestic dogs, and by studying the dogs through that lens, we can get insight into their kind of intrinsic needs, which is key to their well-being and welfare. So, how can we use that from an evolutionary perspective? Ethology, or looking at particularly dog behaviour ethologically, helps us consider their ancestral environment and survival strategies. It helps us to understand behaviours such as marking, digging, denning, caching, foraging, all of these instinctive behaviours which act as a facilitator to survival in the wild. And then we have those breed-specific instincts and traits that vary dramatically within our dogs, from border collies to Labradors, all having their own individual phenotypes and genotypes also. But what we find then is that we can pinpoint certain instincts that have been amplified or reduced through selective breeding, depending on perspective and breed that we're dealing with. But it aids in the development of that breed-specific care and training protocols that we can implement to ensure that canine needs are met appropriately, or animal needs generally. This will apply cross species. And within our dogs, we know that they're a very social species, and the importance of those social structures and communications very much has an ethological lens for domestic dogs, and it's recognising the importance of that need for interaction and social learning and development. Stress and welfare has its role to play too. Ethology helps us recognise signs of stress and anxiety that may be due to suppression of or frustration of natural behaviours. And that could lead us to more effective strategies for enhancing their welfare overall. And if we look at, and dogs are the perfect example of a species where their environment has changed dramatically, particularly in their ability to express themselves freely and to meet their needs on their own. That has really taken a backward step, particularly in modern society, with lead regulations and laws that impinge on their natural behaviour. And we ask a lot of our dogs under these conditions, in my opinion, to adapt to living in a very stressful world with lots of triggers and stressors around, and then being impinged on their behaviour by barriers and heavy management. Of course, we need to do it and we have to comply with the legislation, but we also have to be aware that that has a whack-a-mole effect or a butterfly effect in terms of their own perception about these situations. And I always relate it to about what we would be like if our environment had changed that suddenly. Bearing in mind that 30 years ago, most dogs were free to roam and to enact normal behaviour. They had the prerequisite agency, as we kind of like to call it, whereas now in modern society, dogs lack that agency very much, and you will see that in captive animals across the board. Isn't it interesting that we don't necessarily see our dogs as captive animals? I wouldn't necessarily expect a dog owner to, sort of come to that conclusion themselves. Excuse me. But they very much are, and they very much live in captivity, and their behaviour is very heavily managed by barriers, whether that be doorways, baby gates, and leads also. So the outcome of this can be high levels of stress and poor welfare within individual dogs, and perhaps through sort of adaptation to domestic life, that's maybe evolution has still to catch up in some respects with their overall behaviour. We can't ignore that they have proclivities and predispositions towards behaviour potentially problematic to us, but we can't ignore the fact that they will, whether it's inconvenient to us or not, they're going to present these behaviours because it's instinctive to them. So what can we do to, I guess, make that easier for us to work with our dogs, a better lens to view their behaviour through, so that we can have, well, high levels of empathy and compassion for their plight, because we wouldn't be that different ourselves, in my opinion. And many problem behaviours can be better understood as natural behaviours occurring in an inappropriate context. And ethology could guide us to reshaping these behaviours without causing distress or harm to the dog, by providing appropriate outlets for those predispositions. So that takes us on to how we can maybe apply this in training and behaviour modification. And ethology does provide that foundation for effective and humane training methods by aligning our practices with the natural behaviours and instincts of the dogs themselves. So here's how we can maybe enhance some training. This is something that maybe will help other species in captivity also. I'm sure that most people who work with captive animals will have thought about this stuff, but with dogs in particular, I think it really helps to recognise their instinctual behaviours and then tailor our approach accordingly, rather than an attempt to, say, suppress those natural predispositions or proclivities. For example, natural foraging instincts can be redirected onto activities. It can also be given an appropriate outlet, so that that animal is enriched and feels that that particular intrinsic need is met appropriately. So therefore, they might not feel the need to then go and do that inappropriately. That's kind of the takeaway from that specific activity. But foraging is such a good example of that one, and something I build into all of my behaviour change or behaviour modification plans. I don't think I've met a dog yet that doesn't enjoy using their nose to find things. It's very natural, very normal. And then we can maybe evolve that a little bit further. So yes, all dogs will enjoy foraging. Let's incorporate that into their daily routines to make sure they're enriched. There is very specific breed-specific training that we can do, again, to consider a dog's inherent predisposition. So that might mean like herding breeds that excel in those activities of chasing and pattern recognition, and scent hounds that love to use their nose, or Labradors that love to retrieve. And so there are many examples of these kind of predispositions that we can, I guess, design behaviour change strategies or enrichment activities on a daily basis to meet these needs appropriately. And therefore, just working with more well-adjusted animals that don't have high levels of frustration and unmet needs, which make it problematic. And it's usually the first thing that we will address in any behaviour case, is looking at that foundation of, is this a boredom, understimulation, a lack of natural expression of behaviour type issue? And if it is, then we can immediately start to design a program that will enrich that individual's environment and then tailor it to meet their needs appropriately. And things just get better, in my opinion, from there, usually, unless there are very specific issues. But we'll keep this in generality just now. And it does really reduce stress and anxiety within those individuals, using ethological insights to recognise and then reduce that stress by providing a predictable environment. Reading are really good at reading body language cues, introducing new experiences gradually, fostering positive associations, and allowing choice and offering enrichment. I mean, that's the foundation of nearly every behaviour modification plan that I would construct, is ensuring that physical, mental, emotional, and social needs are all met appropriately, so that we're not facing an unmet need that can be difficult to work around. So we could also be looking at, particularly for the right type of dog who maybe doesn't have a lot of, maybe, say, chronic stress issues, that would enjoy problem solving activities. Then absolutely, we can incorporate that in there. I would caveat that with saying that problem solving might not be that effective for an individual who is chronically stressed, or we might find that highly frustrating to have to problem solve under high levels of anxiety or stress. So we would use this, again, in generality, but it would give us a way to ethologically approach that, so that we can recognise the importance of mental challenge and encourage them in a gradual and controlled way, and a great way to build confidence within individuals. So Following on from that, there are some practical ways that we can go about meeting animals' needs using ethological practices, and mimicking natural behaviour is definitely the way forward. It teaches us that animals evolved specific behaviours in the wild to meet their survival and reproductive needs, and enrichment activities are designed to simulate and satisfy those natural behaviours. And we use foraging as a great example, and scavenging to meet that need, given that dogs in particular are natural scavengers and foragers, and I'm sure across species you will know many species that will benefit from foraging activities. But then it can move that on to other types of mental stimulation, as we spoke about problem solving, maybe engaging the animal in cognitive enrichment, counterbalances of, particularly if there are frustration elements within an individual, we could maybe use cognitive enrichment to, I guess, provide some counterweight or counterbalance, particularly as management techniques, where I find that enrichment activities are just, they're out there on their own for that in terms of management, particularly with dogs, is that providing almost like incompatible cognitive enrichment activities of, a good example might be, and lots of dogs I'm working with just now are barkers and predisposed. We all know there's dachshunds and terriers that are extremely vocal. Pomeranians, a great example too, extremely vocal. But we could maybe use cognitive enrichment to manage those. And problem behavior is definitely something that is a human way of looking at those behaviors. They are natural, normal, instinctive behaviors, but they can be labeled as being problem behavior because they're a bit inconvenient and problematic. And nobody enjoys hearing a dog barking for hours and hours on end. And usually there are reasons and legitimate reasons below that for that vocalization. But through using cognitive enrichment, we could potentially give that individual an activity which is incompatible with what they're currently doing. So they can't sniff and bark at the same time, they can't lick and bark at the same time. And it's a good way to try and rearrange the conditions for that behavior without then having to move into maybe more intrusive methods like using reinforcement strategies of extinction, etc. So it can be a path of least resistance, and it can be a quick win for certain individuals where we see behavior that we don't like. Let's maybe work on an incompatible activity that could replace the conditions for that. So an example of that might be like visitor training. An issue that I have almost routinely with behavior cases is entering a property, being on the receiving end of lots of highly aroused dogs, and straight away we will use those calming parasympathetic activities of licking and sniffing, reduce arousal, give them a focus, and manage their behaviour very effectively. And for some dogs that's enough. I have a great example of 2 Cocker Spaniels I'm working with, lovely dogs, just a beautiful nature, but very vocal when people come into the house, to the point you can't have a conversation. Well, through the incorporation of some of these strategies, we managed to get them absolutely silent on guest entry, and it was lick mats that was a solution to it. Lick mat with Primula cheese was just the solution to that issue. So yes, we could have spent time desensitizing, counter conditioning, all of the triggers that predicted somebody coming to the doorbell, the chapping of the door, the footsteps coming up, all the chuckies, etc. So we could have spent all that time going through it, but actually the path of least resistance was cognitive enrichment, and the dogs just took to it immediately. They were well socialized dogs. There weren't a huge amount of other complex behavior issues on top of that. And then we have been talking mostly about sort of the mental side of it. I think it's really important. Physical activity does play its role, albeit I still always focus more on the low arousal, calming, mental stimulation activities rather than sort of promoting lots of physical activity, which can have its downside also. But it would be important if you have a very fit dog and they have physical needs, or a fit animal and they have physical needs, then we want to ensure those needs are met appropriately, or we will just get a lot of issues at the back end of unmet needs. So preventing boredom and stress, this is just the foundation really of any good behaviour change strategy, is making sure that these needs are met appropriately, and that we are looking at that boredom and stress, maybe ethologically, of deprived of opportunities to engage in natural and normal behaviours freely and with agency. And those activities can prevent the sort of monotony and offer variety in an animal's environment, and that can promote emotional well-being also. Sensory needs also important. We know that animals do have sensory needs, and they have multiple modalities for processing information that includes sight, smell, touch, taste, And providing a diverse kind of sensory environment can really, similar to a natural habitat, can work quite well there. I'm lucky I have a secure dog run close to me that has a sensory garden, which is just unbelievable to take the dogs there and just watch them work through that very natural behaviours of scent acquisition, and then indicating that is something that is pleasant, or not, potentially also. So, what are the key takeaways from the presentation? Well, ethology unlocks understanding. Is a study of animal behaviour, but it provides insight into the natural needs and instincts of animals, and including dogs in that. We know that natural behaviour matters, so recognising and respecting animals' innate behaviours is crucial for their well-being. And as are these behaviours rooted in evolutionary survival strategies, and we can't ignore that fact either. Enrichment activities are essential, informed by ethology, but they are such a powerful tool to meet needs and manage behaviour, and they align those natural behaviours. We offer mental stimulation and promote physical activity. We prevent boredom and stress from creeping in, and at least we can eliminate that from a differential diagnosis, for example, that we know it's not about boredom or some unmet need, that there maybe is some other factor there, medically or otherwise, that we would have to rule out. But a good starting point for any behaviour change strategy is ensuring that animals are not bored, understimulated, and stressed by that, for that very reason of not able to express natural and normal behaviour. And this kind of taps into that kind of holistic well-being, which I really like within behaviour cases, is just making sure that we have a harmonious and fulfilling life for our animals, and that will prevent behaviour issues from developing, and it really enhances the overall well-being of animals in captivity also. So, prevention and health too. Enrichment can prevent behavioural issues from occurring. We spoke about how they can be used to, manage behaviour very effectively, but also accrue positive experiences. And the ones that I like to use the most are calming, relaxing, soothing activities that allow animals to reduce their arousal and cope with the stresses of what they're having to deal with. And yeah, so it gives us, I guess, through ethology, we get a better understanding, more insight into our animals' lives, and it allows us to cater, their needs in a more compassionate and informed manner, which can only be a good thing. And then promoting those natural behaviours, that really is the biggest takeaway I would say from this presentation, is if we can allow our dogs to express natural behaviours, we foster a closer connection with their instincts and their predispositions, and it is just a more enriching environment for them. And again, that can only be a good thing and will apply cross species. And then enhances the animal-human relationship, and by applying these ethological understandings to meet their animals' needs, it leads to happier, healthier, more content animals, fostering stronger bonds and more positive interactions between animals and their human caregivers. And again, it can only be a good thing. And then with continuous adaptation, it allows us to, to adapt to the changing needs of our animals in care, ensuring that we meet their requirements, their ever-evolving requirements effectively. So here are some of the factors, just to cap all that off, which I think affect particularly dog behaviour, albeit this could be, again, cross-species. And it's just some of the factors that do also have to be considered along with, the enrichment side and an ethological lens, as we want to be very functional also and preventative in terms of ruling out as much as we possibly can in terms of underlying factors. That's probably for another time. We could do a full presentation just on that topic alone, but let me quickly scan through this with you, and we can cover it off. So age, absolutely a factor. Genetics, we've just spoken about, heavily influencing behaviours. Learned and past experiences, unresolved undiagnosed medical issues, which is a huge factor and something I've worked more and more with recently, is ensuring that we're not working against medical conditions that could be ruled out or treated. Time of year, we know that this has been recorded at fireworks season, so we know time of year has an impact on stress levels and anxiety, and yeah, they're underpinned by potential lack of socialization. We know that COVID had a big impact on lots of dog owners' ability to socialise their dogs adequately during a critical period for development. Again, a subject for another time, and one we could spend a a webinar talking about exclusively, and then we obviously look at some of the underpinning hormonal changes and again some of the other medical factors there. So that brings us to a conclusion for the webinar. Hope you've enjoyed it. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you very much.